Good evening and welcome to the fourth webinar in our Staying Connected series called Assessing Student Learning Online. We are so glad to have you with us this evening. The session this evening is hosted by myself, Teresha Eller. I'm the Northwest Regional Virtual Instruction Consultant, and my colleague Betsy Hicks, the Northeast Virtual Instruction Consultant. Our featured speaker this evening will be Marc Schaub. He's the English Language Arts middle school teacher at Davie County Virtual School. You see his contact information on the screen if you'd like to reach out to him after our webinar. But before we turn it over to Marc, we want to take just a moment and do a little bit of a welcoming inclusion. And our welcoming inclusion this evening is called This or That. So you'll just drop in the chat which one you would choose from each of these. So first, iced coffee or iced tea. Next, beach or mountains. Book or podcast. Beanbag or recliner. Cool weather or warm weather. Milk chocolate or dark chocolate. And then finally, hiking or tubing. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Marc Schaub.
Happen for that. As Teresa said, I am teaching at the Davie County Virtual School. We sprung sort of out of the Davie County Virtual Academy that was the 2020 to 2021 school year where we were all kind of learning on the fly. And then we were very fortunate to get to kind of build our own program after that and to put together something that was comprehensive for students, that was not just that emergency learning that we had in 2020. So we sprang out of that, but we are far more than that now. This is my 21st year as a classroom teacher. It's my 8th year teaching ELA, and including that 2021 year, my 4th year teaching as a virtual teacher. I think it's probably helpful to have a little bit of background about what we're doing so that you understand what our setup looks like and what our students are getting on a day-to-day basis, because it's not all live, but it's not all just asynchronous. So our students come to live classes Monday through Thursday. They have an hour of math, they have an hour of English language arts every day. In addition to that, students who need to have afternoon interventions, they have afternoon support sessions, that we take time to update who needs to be in those every 4 to 6 weeks. We also have students that come in live for monthly career lessons. We have field trips, we do a field day, we do PBIS reward trips, just like a lot of other schools do. And I think we're very lucky that we can do a lot of those things, partly because we are geographically very small compared to most school districts in the state. So it's really great that we get to do that. Our students also do some learning asynchronously. They still do science and social studies on their own at home, although we do offer a lot of support sessions with that. We tried to use Edgenuity for a year, didn't go so well. Kids weren't a fan of it, parents weren't a fan of it. We've actually been building out our courses this year from the Rethink Ed science and social studies courses, and you'll get to see a little bit of what we do as far as working with the assessments that are part of their package later on. In addition to that, we have local teachers who build, and then we go in and just sort of distribute to kids and grade for students. their electives. We only offer a few, but we do offer like an art elective and a typing elective, a office productivity elective. So students are learning those tools that they need, in addition to having, those electives like art that are, good for their soul. So that's what things look like for us. In addition to that Monday through Thursday schedule, our students do have a flexible day on Friday. We tried it on Wednesday, wasn't terribly popular with parents because they were like, well, we don't need our flex day to be Wednesday, we need it to be Friday. And it was interesting that we got more complaints from parents than we did from students. But a core part of our mission from day one has been that flexibility for students and families. Students still have new work assigned to that day, so it's not a catch-up day. They have lessons that day. That's also when we get our field trips and all those things out of the way. And it's also when we do a lot of our assessments that we're going to be talking about here. Okay. Very occasionally, in addition to bringing students in for field trips and lessons and things like that, we will actually use that time to bring in a virtual student who maybe we're not really clear about their data because we don't really know what's going on at home. Maybe we're concerned that a child isn't really doing their work, right? And isn't really doing those assessments. So that's what that Friday is done, used for as well. Everything that we do, just like every other school in Davie County Schools, runs through the DCS instructional framework. And if you are, at all familiar with those 4 big PLC questions, you can see that all of that stuff fits right into this little graphic that they've got. We've got student learning at the beginning of everything. We do think a lot about culture in our school, everything from the flexibility that we offer them to the support that we offer them to having that morning meeting every day with every student to make sure that everybody is socialized as much as we can provide. So all of that stuff for culture is really important for us. And of course, it's that left side of this instructional framework that I'm going to talk about a lot today, which is that reflect and adjust. Because I think when we think about assessment, sometimes we think about assess and move on. And I think the way that technology works now, there are so many things that we can do to reflect and adjust as we assess students. It was much harder to do that, I think, before. I taught 4 years in a regular classroom and 4 years online. It was hard in that regular classroom to see what were we going to do and how we're going to make those adjustments quickly. So we sort of live in that green arrow in our school almost all the time. And I know a lot of schools are doing that as well. But certainly when we talk about assessment, that's where we're living as well. So I'm going to talk about 2 groups of things that we use that are online tools. And none of this is going to be like a how-to or, an in-depth look on any of them, but rather, hey, does this work for you? Would this work for you? Can you find hopefully something, if this is not available to you, something that will be similar, that would get you going in the right direction. So there are 2 sets of things that I want to talk about. The first, of course, is those formative assessments that we use to look at what kids are doing. If you're not familiar with Easy CBM, it's kind of a great program. There are some limitations, and we'll talk about those in just a second. We mostly use those for our beginning, middle, and end of year screeners for our students. Though we also use them for progress monitoring with many of our students who are receiving interventions. And we'll talk about more about these as we go along. IXL is a great tool. I know it's being used in a lot of districts. I know probably a lot of districts are looking at a sunset date on that, and I hope that some districts are looking past ESSER funds toward renewing it. If you're in that area, I think that's really great, because that's definitely something that we are glad to be keeping in Davie County schools. And then I am going to talk just a little bit about the NC check-ins and the monitoring that we can do as far as state standards go. I do want to talk a little bit about summative assessments too. One of the things that they talked to me about was what are the best ways that we can leave feedback or give feedback to students when using technology. And so we'll talk about three options for that. One is specific to English language arts and reading, but the other two can be used in a lot of different ways, right? So the quizzes tool in Canvas for content tests, and we use that. We're a Canvas district, which I think like 85% of the state is right now, but we use those Canvas quizzes for lots and lots of different things, including daily work sometimes. Google, we're also a Google district, is great for longer assignments. You know, there are some days that I wish that that we were still like a Google Classroom district, but Google's integration with Canvas is really, really good, especially over the last year. It was a real pain for a couple of years there, but it's gotten a lot better. And then I want to talk a little bit about Common Lit, which is that reading ELA specific. So we're going to kind of talk about all six of those things, and again, how we use them, and specifically in DCVS, the way that we use them with how we look at a student and where they are, what do they know, how can we reflect and adjust, and how do we move on. So I guess this is kind of a case study that we're going to go through, but I'm going to give you a little bit more information. So we're going to take a look at one of our students and kind of the data journey for this student this year. Right. So Jay's not his real name, but Jay. Jay is a seventh grade student at our school. He's been with us since the fall of 2020. So he had that 1 year of emergency learning from 2020 to 2021, where he was served by like a rotation of of elementary teachers. The structure was very odd. It did not work very well for Jay. You know, that's coming from him and from his parents. It was very tough for him. Jay has now been with us for 3 years, almost 3 years now. He is identified as an English learner. English is not the first language spoken in his home. In fact, it is the other language spoken in the home is spoken like 80 to 90% of the time, based on you know the data that the parents report to us. Despite that, his parents continue to decline EL services from our county. So this is a student that that we have to constantly be on top of. What are we doing next, and where are we going to take Jay as we move along? He's an extremely hard worker. He's been a higher achiever in math, but has really, really struggled in English language arts. So the first thing I want to do is talk to you a little bit about that cycle of formative assessments and how it determines what we do with this student. And then I'm going to look at some of the other assessments that we do. So at the beginning of every year, we take a look at our students and we look at three components. We look at their past EOG performance, and as much as we can, we try to get several years in a row. One of the things that's been very frustrating for us as a virtual school is that some things just got lost. Not whole folders, but like maybe a sticker didn't get put on somewhere, so we don't have that student's EOG from 2 years ago. But as much as we can, we like to get all of that. And then we use the Easy CBM screener and the IXL diagnostic that I mentioned earlier to see where they are. We want to do what every other school does. For every kid, we want to build as clear a data picture as we can from the first day. So I want to talk a little bit about Easy CBM. You might be familiar with it, you might not. I think that there are some great things about Easy CBM from the standpoint of telling you about whether a student is comprehending what they're reading. Just a basic score of comprehension, a basic idea of are they getting it? It can be really, really helpful. I do think that the questions are a little shallow sometimes. It certainly doesn't give us standard specific data. Some of the sample questions that I have here, I kind of think of them as like Common Core light questions, in that they are a little bit more than what happened in paragraph 2, but not quite as structured as we might see even on something in IXL. So that's where we start. Unfortunately, what Easy CBM gives us is pretty similar to what we know from the EOG. We get a number right and we get a percentile. okay? But it definitely can help tell us where does this student need to go. And we'll get to where Jay is in just a second. If you haven't used IXL, it's a wonderful, wonderful tool, and we feel very fortunate to have it as our diagnostic tool in Davie County. I know that there are other places that are using diagnostic tools like this, and we weren't really sure. I think the county was not terribly sure right from minute one whether or not they wanted to sink into this, knowing that the ESSER money was going to eventually run out. But even with ESSER running out, they're sticking with this as a diagnostic tool. One of the things I really like about IXL, even in ELA, but certainly in math, is that the skills that students are asked to do are really pretty well aligned with our state standards. There are some standards that are not terribly well addressed in ELA. For example, RI3, RL3, right? Asking for those relationships and interactions in text. Some of those skills are like, it's the skill that's there doesn't really help to address it. But that's where obviously we got to come up with other things to do. RI5, RL5, right? What's the role of a paragraph? And it doesn't do that very well either. But lots of stuff it does very, very well. And of course, the other thing I mentioned was the NC check-ins, and we'll come back to those in a second. So what does Jay's story look like? Okay. So this is Jay's data. Jay's hanging out down there right below the 50th percentile on the reading EOG for the last 4 years, right? Which is not terribly surprising, probably, given what I've already told you, that Jay is an English learner in a household where English is not spoken the majority of the time, and that he went out for COVID in the 3rd grade and then had 4th grade with that crazy year, right? Formative years for this student. Okay. We also noticed a couple of other things. One, he's a level 4 student in math, right? So there's got to be something going on there. Otherwise, he wouldn't be getting word problems right. Yeah. The other thing that we noticed at the beginning of this year, and we've had some teacher turnover, is that there's a discrepancy between Jay as not a proficient reading student and getting A's in English language arts all the time. So we had to ask ourselves some questions about why that was the case. And we started being able to answer those questions through his screeners. So in the upper right, you see the score that Jay got on the Easy CBM screener. He got 12 questions out of 20 right in the 49th percentile, right where he had been for the EOGs. Okay. And if we look, and I know that this is probably small on your screens, but over on the left, this is the the IXL diagnostic. And over on the left, what I've circled is Jay's reading strategy score in the IXL diagnostic, which is about a 480. Now, if you look at the IXL literature, what they tell you is that score, that 3-number score, is indicative of where a student is along that like grade level continuum. So a student at the beginning of 7th grade should have a 700 in that reading strategy score. Jay started with a 480. So according to IXL, he's about, a little more than 2 grades behind starting with us. So we knew, okay, it's those reading strategies, because we've also got a pretty high vocabulary score, which is not surprising because Jay loves spelling. Okay. Got a pretty high writing strategy score. Jay writes a better email to me and a more fully fledged email to me than any of my other students, right? He just pays attention to those things. So we knew like this is a reading thing and that's what we're going to have to do. So what did we decide to do with Jay with the data that we had? Well, we decided to put an intervention in once a week. And we decided to go with the Striving for Oral Language and Achievement in Reading, SOAR. If you haven't heard of it, I actually really, really like this, and I wish I'd have known about it 8 years ago when I started teaching ELA. It's a free program put together out of, I didn't put it on my slide. I think it's UT Austin, but if you do a little Google on it, it's pretty easy. They have the whole thing available for download as a PDF. And essentially what it does is it is a series of lessons that take students through these measures of understanding, vocabulary, picking out key details, main ideas, central idea. And it's a very methodical process that goes through that. You know, we do it twice a week with him and about 6 other students. It has, I'll take you through on the next slide to show you kind of what it looks like, but it has actually paid some dividends, and you'll see how in just a minute. Okay. The other thing that we did with Jay, and not always, but a lot of the time, he's also included in a skills focused support session. So that SOAR is a big time reading comprehension intervention. The support time is, can we get you focused on some other specific standards aligned skills besides just main idea and sporting details, right? And so we use targeted IXL data. We also use targeted data from the check-ins. And again, I'll get back to that in a second. So this is kind of what SOAR looks like. The left-hand column is the section of text, right? You read that with students. And on the right-hand side is the instructions. The teacher instructions could not be more clear. The student page could not be more well organized, and I really like that. It is really about reading, checking their understanding, and turning keywords into main ideas and central idea. This has paid off a lot for several of us, several of our students who are working with this throughout this year. They're all middle school students. There are 7 of them, in fact. And we're starting to see some gains from that because of that, the methodology behind it. I do have the link right here. It's meadowscenter.org. I'll put it in the chat in a little while. But once students start seeing the formula to this, and they start being able to pick out keywords, like that's kind of the breaking point for them to be able to get rolling with this. I suspect this is probably easier to do in person. Putting a sheet of paper in a little whiteboard, a little whitey thing, and writing it down with a dry erase marker and all those things. But I sent packets home to students at the beginning of this year. They all have their manila folders. Those little manila folders come out at the beginning of interventions, and we get it done, and it's working pretty well. So you can kind of see reading the paragraph, checking for understanding keywords, main ideas. So that's our step 1. Step 2 is building Jay's more specific reading skills. Excuse me. Building Jay's more specific reading skills. And this is something that I do with all students when we go through and we look at North Carolina check-ins, right? After each round of check-ins, I sit down with our elementary reading person and we look at all of our data. I know this is probably hard to read because it's very small, but I'll explain it to you. We look at each question. We look at not what the question says, but what skill the question is asking, and then the standard. Because we want to align it not only to instruction, but to the intervention in IXL. We look at correct answers so that we think about, hey, what did students get right? What was the majority wrong answer that they asked for, right? And then we always take some guesses about why they got it incorrect, right? Everything from they didn't understand a word in the question to they got mixed up on, what the question was asking, to they didn't go back and read paragraph 4 when it said, reread paragraph 4 and tell me the definition of this word, right? So when we go through, we look at all of those things. Then we ask ourselves 4 questions. Which ones of these did we not teach yet? Which you don't want to ever admit, but some of these things we didn't get to before the test, right? Not what standards didn't we teach, but what skills didn't we teach? There's a difference, especially in English, right? Where we might teach half of a skill for an 8th grade, but not get to everything yet, right? Like maybe I've done author's point of view, but we haven't quite gotten to purpose, or vice versa. Then we ask, what do we need to reteach or teach better? We think about the skills that the whole class needs to practice, and then how do we target those individual students? That's what we're talking about with Jay. So with Jay, we're looking at check-ins that pretty much line up with what we already knew. Okay. That first check-in, he got 38% right. The second one was 54, a little bit better, but still, we're not really happy about it. And if we break it down into domains, we can see that the language domain is really rough, right? That's a problem for Jay. But again, we kind of knew. We also saw that informational text is a little bit better than literary text, but that's not surprising. Jay's big into history when he does read, so that's what we see with him. If we boil it down, you can really see that these language skills, right? Definitions, idiomatic speech, what's the meaning of this phrase? All of those things are really tough. And so when we put Jay into those skills in IXL, it wasn't just that we looked at that L thing and said, oh, well, he needs to work on all the skills in the language domain in IXL. We went back and we looked at its idioms. That's really the biggest thing for him. Figuring out idioms, figuring out the meanings of words and phrases, okay? I did go back and I looked at Common Lit just to see after he's had this main idea and supporting details stuff with SOAR all year, and you could see that his skills in those standards, right, RI1 and RI2, talking about main ideas, central ideas, supporting details, have gotten a lot better, okay? So again, what did we do with Jay? Well, we ended up putting him in that SOAR. It's paying off. We ended up doing things with IXL that we needed to, and it's paying off. So we've got him doing skills, right? This is the skill page for Jay. It's all these idioms and what is the other thing? Adages, idioms and adages. Those are the things that he's currently working through because that's what we've identified. So this is what Jay's ELA schedule has basically been for the entire year. Monday through Thursday, he has 1 hour of live classes. On Monday and Wednesday, that's SOAR intervention. On Tuesday and Thursday, IXL practice. Friday, individual practice, asynchronous assignments, office hours. I almost always meet with Jay from about 9:15 to 9:45 because he always has a lot of questions, right? So where did that get us, right? As we looked at this continuous cycle of assessing, what do we do? How can we support? Well, it got us here. Okay. That bottom number on the left, the overall English language arts level, started at a 590 this year, and now it's 770. Okay. The reading strategies number that I pointed out was at a 480 is now a 750. That's that purple number way on the left, right? So taking those assessments and rolling them, continuing to roll them in and figure out what we can do next for a student is really important. But it does take time, right? Everything that I just talked to you about is a piece of data that we can get through a really good assessment program. But then you got to sit down and say, what does it mean and what can we do? And it does really pay off. This is just another graph showing, I took it on a different day, so it says 760 instead of 770. But this is where we've seen that come up, okay? This was very interesting. This was his easy CBM 49th percentile at the beginning of the year to 94th percentile at the end of January, which feels like an outlier. And I'm very interested to see where Jay ends up with this, but we'll see what the end of year screener says. Okay. I will tell you that I looked at his, this doesn't reflect this, but I did look at his check-in 3 this morning because we took him on Friday. And almost everything is better, okay? His performance in theme and central idea is much better than the one question he got right on the first 2. He got all of those RI, RL2 section questions right. RI6 is still an issue for him, but we're going to hit it between now and the end of the year. And almost all of the language things are still, he's still having a trouble with. right? So my week is going to be thinking about how can I, get him in gear between now and the end of the year on those language standards, right? What else can we try? I do want to say one other thing about the check-ins before I move on to the summative assessment feedback things. Watch out for this number. I'm sure we all know folks who have said, oh, my kids went from 38% to 54% on check-in 1 to check-in 2, so that's fine. And I really, obviously, we all want our kids to do better percentage-wise. It's great when they get more questions right than they got wrong, and I love that. But there's more to be done with that. So hopefully we're all taking that time to look at by standard and by question what's being asked and what are our kids actually accomplishing. And that's doesn't matter what subject we're talking about, right? Whether we're talking about ELA or math or science, on any of those check-ins. But don't just look at that top line number, because it doesn't tell us very much, right? I could look at this and say, oh, Jay's doing better alongside his EOG scores, but those things have very little relationship. So if you're looking at the check-ins, make sure you're doing a deep dive on them, right? Just looking at those standards. So again, just looking at the framework again before we go to the summative assessments, all of this fits inside that green arrow, right? We want to make sure that we're constantly looking at what students are doing and how we can adjust to what they need, right? Again, my whole week will be, how do I get that language domain figured out for him? Yeah. I do want to take some time too to talk about summative assessments and the things that we use that are electronic assessment tools that may or may not be analogous to what you use in the classroom, but they're definitely things that have made our lives easier. So this is a screenshot of a question from the 7th grade social studies course that Rethink Ed did. I know it's small, but I can kind of try to talk you through it. There's a question here about the Lend-Lease Act. When the students answer it in the formative assessment that they do at the end of each little lesson, if they get the wrong answer, it will give them that feedback down at the bottom, right? It auto-generates it based on how the course was built by the Rethink folks before we imported it into Canvas. So we feel really fortunate that that's there as a resource. That was actually one of the things we really liked about Edgenuity, was that students got like, hey, I got this right, hey, I got this wrong, before they went on to an end of unit assessment. And so we leave that in for formative assessments as we go. We did go back and take it out on the end of unit assessments in Rethink, because, well, we don't want the kids cheating with each other. And we've had a little bit of that. It's been it's been tough, but if they're getting that feedback, then it's easier for them to do it. So we took that feedback out from the end of course or end of unit assessments. The other great thing about Canvas quizzes is that you can go back in and you put written feedback when there is an essay answer, right? So this comes from an 8th grade social studies course. A student was answering about new technologies in the 1920s, and there's a little piece of positive feedback that I gave them here, right? Great choices, detail that they gave, all of those things. So I really like that both of those things, that we can put those into a multiple choice question as well as an essay question. So yeah. Another place where we're able to do that in ELA is Common Lit. Common Lit has really come a long way in the last 8 years with regard to the lessons that are available, target lessons that are available, the way that questions are written, and some of their 360 units. A lot of their free product is really outstanding. But for me, it really goes back to the reason I started using them in the first place. They have every piece of reading that they do has at least one short answer question. I can teach my kids how to answer it most of the time using the ACE or RACE method, and I can leave them feedback immediately, right? So this student had a question here about an article called "How the Need to Belong Influences Human Behavior," And you can see that this student, well, it's Jay, wrote an answer and then put a bunch of weird evidence and then didn't really explain it. And so I'm able to give specific feedback for him to go back and look at, right? We need to talk about you formatting this right. We need to identify the paragraph where you got your answer. And then we need to explain the connection, not just the importance of what you're doing. So whether or not I'm doing that live or meeting with Jay in office hours, which again, I often do, he's got that feedback there to respond to. And this is not the same article, but you can see that what Jay has done over the course of the year, as he's gotten this feedback, he's made little tweaks from time to time, and now he's able to give an answer, tell me where that came from, and give me at least some, something looking like an explanation about it. So that's a thing that I really like about Common Lit. I'm using that to lead into what's great about Google Assignments, right? Google Assignments as an LTI in Canvas is really wonderful. There are some expanded options this year. One is you can just put it in as a Google Assignments, which is great if you are an English teacher having your students write an essay, because you can go in and give them feedback in real time. And I'll show you what that looks like in a second. Or if you have students doing a short assignment, like a lot of what we do with Rethink, and you just want to see it, you can use SpeedGrader in Canvas as normal. It's really great. So the real-time feedback of Google is so important for us, because I can't walk by a student's desk and point and say, hey, what are we doing here, right? But what I can do is jump onto Jay's document and leave a comment and say, hey, here's a few things you might want to fix. You've got some text running over, the dialogue bubble looks real bad. And Jay decided that he was going to change this to a completely different little thing for this social media project that we were doing, right? And so it's that feedback that's really great. What's really cool is, with that electronic feedback, before we come in the next day, I can go back and finish putting feedback on other students' assignments. And even if they don't look at it that night, we're ready to immediately do it without having to pass out any papers or any of that stuff, right? Right from the first moment. The other thing is putting feedback on their post assignment in Canvas, right? So this is a Google assignment on the left. Jay did not do a very good job on this because we were looking for 2 to 3 sentences and he didn't really show his understanding. So I left this comment on the right? The instructions state that you should be doing this and you haven't done that. And that's why your grade is a 75 on this entire assignment. And he never really went back and did anything, but on a lot of times he does, right? Other times he's very good about it, right? You'll notice over here on the left, he's got 3 numbered things, just made a list. I left him feedback that said, you can't just make a list, you got to tell me some details. And he went back and he turned that list into a thing. So for us, having that ability to leave feedback on an asynchronous assignment is a huge deal, okay? So we don't teach kids specifically the framework, right? We don't talk to them about this because they'd be bored by it. But we, in the same way that we live out in the green arrow as teachers, we want them to live there as students as well, right? To get that feedback, to be able to reflect and adjust. And that's where Google, Canvas, and for me and ELA, Common Lit are so valuable. That's all I have prepared. You guys said 45 minutes. It's 4:45. I feel like I've been talking at everybody, but
Pull my microphone down. Sorry, y'all. You had a lot to share. I loved the using Jay as an example. Anyway, that structure. So I'm going to open the floor up and say, if you've got questions for Marc, you can drop them in the chat, or the group is small enough, you can actually unmute your microphone and just ask him directly. We do have a little bit of time left. So while you're thinking about what your questions are, I'm also going to put in the chat the link to the CEU request. If you need that 0.1 CEU, if you will, just fill out this Google form. I will generate your certificate probably sometime tomorrow and get it to you and get it emailed to you. But yeah, if you have any questions about assessments, I did see there was one in there. Do all schools use Easy CBM or only your virtual school? And Mark, you may have answered that because I didn't hear all of your response. I'm not sure if you answered that
Yeah,
question for Karen.
that's our first step standard treatment protocol for Davie
Gotcha.
County School. Yeah, so
Gotcha.
that's
Okay.
everybody. I suspect that maybe they are having elementary students take that on paper when possible.
Right.
And certainly for some of their progress monitoring, they are. So
Okay. Awesome. So absolutely very appreciative of everything that you shared, Mark. That was fabulous. I do want to let everybody know before you leave. I'm going to reshare my screen so you can see the details, and I will also put this link in the chat. We do have one more webinar in our series, and that one is called Family and Community Engagement in a Virtual Environment. So what that looks like when you are strictly working in a virtual school or remote academy. So if you are interested in that one and you have not already registered, I'm going to put that link in the chat as well. And this will be our final webinar in this series. I'm not sure what next school year has coming up, but we're super excited. I'm going to stop the recording as well. And if you want to go back and see previous webinars that you were